You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast produced by Veteran Strategies and featuring conversations with fascinating and impactful men and women who have shaped our world, our communities, and our history. My name is Robert Vane, Principal of Veteran Strategies, and your host for our discussion. You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmong Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and NFP, a national insurance broker with strong local content. Our podcast is featured on the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact Chris Spangle and me at leadersandlegends.net. And as always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. MacAllister. Thank you for joining us on the Leaders and Legends podcast today. Our guest is Jake Oakman, who has done so many things and done them so well that his bio on the website is voluminous.
Mm-hmm. I had my mom write it, so...
Jake Oakman is the executive director of the White River State Park Development Commission. The executive director leads the team that manages all aspects of the park's operations, including marketing, property management, sales, and most important, the delightful concerts that you bring. Beginning in late 2019, Jake led all marketing and communications efforts related to the governor's historically successful re-election campaign. He's also been, were you state party comms director?
Mm-hmm. Concurrently with that.
That's what I thought. He was director of comms for state Republican Party, about 12 years after I did it.
I think so.
I was 2006, 2007.
Yeah, so I was 19 to 20.
Jake is...
You told me there'd be no math, so I don't know. I guess that's 14 years, 13.
We'll give you some time.
Oh, thank you. I do have a pen and pencil. You look a lot better than I do. You look younger than me, which is offensive, but...
My grandkids are getting ready to turn 6, you know.
I did not know that.
Well, if you get some sort of 80s rap concert here, I'll bring them.
Okay.
Jake is truly a wonderful friend to all of us. He's incredibly well respected. He's a terrific guy, and we're very grateful to have him on here. We're going to talk a little bit about his career, a little bit about White River. That should take about 3 minutes total, and then 57 minutes about the fact that he's a huge history buff, which is all we really care about.
Okay. I'm ready.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
You've interesting how I look at your career, and it seems like at some point, without flattering myself, you made a decision like I made. For me to be successful in my adult life, I need to get involved in politics. Mm-hmm. Is that a fair statement?
I think that's fair. I mean, it's something I'd always been interested in. And then also, I mean, when you get involved in politics, you meet so many people from so many different walks of life that just that networking and those relationships open doors for you that you may have not considered when you first started on. Like, my career isn't an A to B to C. It doesn't make any sense when you really look at it. But it goes back to wanting to get involved in politics, make a difference, and then also meet similarly minded people who also wanted to have an impact in the community.
It's the networking aspect of it that is so important.
Absolutely. And
not just among your peers, but among people who can pluck your name out of a pile and go, talk to my friend Jake. Mm-hmm. Is that your experience
Absolutely.
In both cases? P.E. MacAllister was obviously my experience.
Yeah. I mean, and that was when I was at IU, I met Jim Morris. He was on the board of was the president of the board of trustees when I graduated. And, he's a man who's had such a great influence on Indianapolis for 50 years. And he was incredibly helpful to me. I met Eric Holcomb in 2003 when I first moved to the city, and obviously he's gone on to do a few notable things in his career, and he's been incredibly helpful. But yeah, it's just in Indianapolis, it's interesting. It's a big city, but it still has a small city feel where you kind of get into the bubble of politics, and everyone knows everyone, even across party lines. And so yeah, it's those relationships and networks definitely pay dividends.
You were student body president
I was.
At Indiana University?
Uh-huh. That's when I peaked.
So do we call you Mr. President?
You can. I don't require it, but you can.
I understand. I hope that Governor Holcomb refers to you as that.
He refers to me as many things, but never. It's never been Mr. President.
Did you run for student president because you thought you could have a career in politics one way or the other?
The truth is I ran, and I was student body president of my high school too, and the reason I did it was the same. I'm not a stellar academic student. I do enough to get by. And so I figured that I would need some pretty nice extracurriculars if I was going to get into a college when I was in high school, or if I'm going to have some sort of marketability once I graduate. So, I was a solid B student, and then needed something to differentiate myself.
What was your first political gig?
Ever? Probably, if you consider that, probably being student body president of my high school was sort of the first time I ever really put myself out there. And
you were South Bend, right?
Well, I was born in South Bend, but I grew up in Springfield, Ohio. I went to high school with John Legend. I like to say he's the second most famous alum of Springfield North High School.
You stay in touch with Mr. Legend?
No. I didn't really know him. My brother knew. They graduated together, and they were friends and in several classes together. But I did run into Chrissy Teigen once when she was in town for the Super Bowl 10 years ago. Well, for me, yeah, she was shocked and saddened. As
she proved to be elusive until you finally...
But that was my opening. Hey, I went to high school with your fiance. And then we chatted, and I thought maybe there was... But no, I guess she wanted somebody talented and successful and so forth.
He ended up being named People Magazine's Sexiest Man Alive.
Yeah, well, If
you want, we can do a recount.
I think that's what we need to do.
What made you go to IU other than the fact that it's just such a blast?
That's pretty much it. I was born in South Bend, so I always had that connection to Indiana. It was the only school I applied to, which looking back on it wasn't the wisest thing for me to do because I didn't get in on my application was put on, we're going to need a little bit more information. Let's see those second semester grades. But when I was doing some college visits the summer after my junior year in high school, I visited Bloomington, and it was a done deal. You go to when you see the campus, it's just lock it up.
Everybody, we've obviously had several IU grads on the podcast, whether Jim Morris, Ray Tolbert, lots, Tom Coverdale, who I know.
Oh yeah,
every one of them would go back tomorrow. Like if I could go back tomorrow. And I'm like, what about if you could go back with the money you have now? And they're like, oh my God, I'd probably just be wasted all. I'd be having so much fun. I'd never go to school because they were all so poor when they were in college.
That's the thing. Some of the things I was able to enjoy about Bloomington 20 years ago, the recovery time just isn't there for me anymore. So I might be able to go down there for like a day, and it would take me about a week to get right again. So
you mentioned Jim Morris. I'll ask you a question here in a few minutes. If there's a particular Hoosier leader or legend you admire most, you won't be able to say Jim Morris. We've just about retired his name since it gets mentioned so often. But since you've already talked about him a little bit, what is it about you and Jim working together that made a difference? He clearly took an interest in your career. And when someone like Jim Morris takes an interest, when you don't have a name, right, you're nobody's son, you're nobody's grandson or whatever, that can make all the difference in the world.
Yeah, and I think it just speaks to him and how much he cares about, propping up the next and following generations. He got some opportunities. I'm sure there are people that reached a hand out when he was making some moves in his career or just graduating college. And he's always, as long as I've known him, he'll always take a meeting. He'll always talk to somebody if they show an interest in service. and not just, hey, I want to make something of myself, but I want to contribute back to the community. And I think that there's that generation of leaders and legends that worked for Mayor Lugar that have always had that sort of pay it forward mentality, even into sort of, their retirement years where they don't really have they don't need to do that. They don't need to reach out the way they do. And I just think it's really special about him and several of his peers that continue to do that.
Which other famous IU alums are you friends with or know pretty well? When did you graduate from IU?
2002.
So that was the year they made it to the final game, lost to Maryland, right?
I do like to say that, I was the last student body president that took him to the Final Four.
So tell me about being on campus when Knight got fired.
Well, it was crazy. It was, I went out and, quote, protested, quote, unquote, but I think it was...
Was that you in the stonewashed jeans that I saw there?
Yeah. No, I wasn't. But I think it was like a classic thing when you're 19 or 20 where 5% of the people were really legitimately upset, and then 95% of us were just like, hey, it's something to do. Let's go. And I didn't destroy any property. I want to state that for the record. But it was just a really weird couple weeks or maybe 1 week. But I remember the night he got fired, we all sort of went out and expressed our disapproval. And then like 4 or 5 days later, he gave this farewell speech at Dunn Meadow.
You were there.
I was there, yeah. And I remember waiting just sort of in the middle of this field for like an hour before he finally came out. And it was sponsored by the IDS, which I know like
Indiana Daily
student. And I think there was a lot of concern amongst the faculty and staff that the newspaper was supporting this like anti-IU propaganda speech. And then, he sort of disappeared from Bloomington for several years and is finally having some sort of reconciliation.
Would you have fired him?
Absolutely, yeah.
He'd have been President Brand instead of President Oakman. You would have fired him?
Well, because he agreed to that no tolerance policy, and he violated it. So I don't know how if you're President Brand at the time, or if you're Coach Knight, I don't know how you kind of walk back from that.
You're listening to the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest is Jake Oakman, Executive Director of the White River State Park Development Commission. You said that you didn't really have a stair step. A leads to B, B leads to C. I was the opposite in the sense that I'm hoping that A leads to B, leads to C. When did you settle on a career or an interest in politics enough, like that's how I want to make my living? And there are people around who I'm willing to work 75 hours a week for very little pay because I believe in them.
It was probably around 2010 when I started working for Governor Daniels. I always had an interest in politics and did some volunteer work for Todd Young's first campaign when he was running for the House. I worked for Mark Massa's prosecutorial campaign. But when I was Governor Holcomb had a big hand in me getting the job with Mitch Daniels, and then just sort of working in that office, especially for Governor Daniels, who is a living legend for several reasons, just sort of gave me the idea that you can have this career and you can actually be part of something that's making a difference in the community and the state. And so then every job I've had since then, in some respect, has either been with the state or working for different campaigns.
I haven't done it in a long time, but I used to speak in front of colleges, journalism class or political science class or whatever. It's been years and years. But I always say, get involved in politics. I don't care how you vote. Get involved in politics. You will meet the best people.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Why don't you take that and run with it?
Well, it's true. I didn't grow up here, like you said. I'm not I'm not Jake Oakman the third or fourth or fifth or anything like that. I'm just a guy who grew up in Ohio. But because I got involved in politics and showed that I'm trustworthy and I can work hard and I'm not necessarily always out for just promoting myself, that really opens a lot of doors for you. And again, you get involved in these campaigns or you get involved in these causes, and like you said, it doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on or what issues you're supporting. It's sort of the same kind of ecosystem where you just meet a lot of different people. they go off and do their separate things, but you stay in contact with them. So it like keeps opening different doors and broadening that network for you. And you get to a point where you're on the Leaders and Legends podcast with Robert Vane. So it all ends up being worth it.
We have sponsorships available.
Really? Okay.
Do you have, let me ask you, give me a Democrat you're a good friend with, and just, him or her, and just say, great guy, cares about the city, cares about the state.
I will, for their protection, I won't name names.
Well, I mean, now you're here at the state park. It'd be different if you were a state party still.
No, I mean, I'm sure I'm friends with a few. It's interesting that,
because people think that they're like not friends, like they believe what they see or read on the news, and I'm not necessarily blaming the media, but they honestly think that people are at daggers drawn while waiting in line in the Starbucks or whatever, like they're breaking out into fights. And it's so, the more I tell my friends, the more you get involved in politics, the more reasonable you will be about politics.
Right. And I also think the closer you get to street level, the more like sort of the passions of political affiliation sort of fade away. So, on the federal level, it is almost about R's versus D's. On the state level, it's not as combative or heated. At the city level, it's even a little bit less than that. I mean, you look at how the governor and the mayor work together on some issues for the city. So, yeah, it's certainly not like, I see a Democrat and I'm ready to throw down.
But is it fair to say that's the perception, and that you have those conversations like, oh, how can you possibly be friends with him? And you're like,
I think that happens every once in a while. I bet there's probably a lot more people, Republican and Democrat, that say that when people say they're friends with Jake. Like, how can you be friends with that guy? He's such a buffoon.
I feel sorry for your comms person.
Yeah. Well, we go through him pretty quickly.
Do you have a particular political memory that sticks out? Because I'm getting ready to ask you about, we had Michael Bryan and Kyle Hupfer and Pete.
Yes. He worked at the White House. I call him White House Pete.
That's true. Mm-hmm. Isn't his dog named like Wrigley or something?
I think his dog is named Paxton. I think it's named after.
Isn't he a huge Cubs fan?
He is, but also Bulls. I think that's a Bulls player.
Because he's from the region.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Didn't he get drafted by the Bulls?
I think so.
Sorry, Pete. I can't help it. I'm with Jake. It just brings out the hate in me. I'm very.
There's no hate. I'm a fan.
Is there a particular memory that sticks out for you working in politics? I had Pete, Mike, and Kyle on the podcast talking about the 60-day campaign or whatever it is. In 2016 when Eric Holcomb won the first time.
My favorite, 2016 just in general is my favorite memory. And there's several I can remember when the governor was lieutenant governor and I was traveling with him. I was his communications director when he was lieutenant governor. And we were at some event in Indianapolis, like an urban farm event. And it's when the news broke that Barron Hill was dropping out of the Senate race and Evan Bayh was coming into it. And I was the one that got to break that to the then lieutenant governor. And then just like all of the, with Mike Pence becoming the vice presidential nominee, and I went to the convention. I was Governor Holcomb's body guy at the convention, so I was sort of able to see all the backstage goings on at the 2016 convention. So just that whole year was pretty insane. Even going back to when the governor was running for the Senate and was appointed lieutenant governor, and we were all kind of
Governor Holcomb in 2016 was running for the Senate. Mm-hmm. And then
Mike Pence, Sue Ellspermann was named president at Ivy Tech. There was a vacancy for lieutenant governor. Mike Pence named Eric Holcomb lieutenant governor. And so we were all kind of gearing up for the Pence-Holcomb campaign in 2016 for re-election. And then, of course, Donald Trump came along and changed a lot of things, including that race.
I say in every podcast that I can that's relevant to him, Eric Holcomb is the most down-to-earth political person I've ever met. He's right there with Greg Ballard, Dan Coates, Andy Jacobs. I mean, there's a list, but he's at the top of it. And nobody has traveled the state more than Eric Holcomb. Like I can only imagine how many times he's been in Cafe X in County Y. And I really believe that's an asset for him that he has traveled it so much.
And that started in 98 or 97, whenever he came back from the Navy, from NATO, and was working for Hostetler. It wasn't something that started in 16 when he became a statewide candidate. And I think especially if you look at how the state politically has turned from being blue to purplish to deep red now, I mean, Eric Holcomb's been a part of that from day one. And the areas that he was working in before the Mitch Daniels campaign, that southern Indiana, river corridor was solid blue, and now it's solid red. And I think he earned a lot of that, turnover. And he hasn't changed either, which is interesting. Working as a comms person for him, I just never had to worry about waking up one morning and seeing him having said something or done something that you had to go fix or clean up. It's just like he is who he is, and he hasn't changed since he's been governor. He didn't change when he was lieutenant governor. I mean, he's the same guy.
He's the same guy who gets giddy about his presidential signatures.
Right,
collection.
Exactly. Yeah.
When he was working for Senator Coates, I had some client in there to meet, and he's like, "Hey, come here before the meeting starts. Hey, come here. I'm like, "What's going on?" He goes, "Look at these signatures. Look." And he's never changed that part of that aspect of his Hoosier life.
And it's genuine. I mean, he really is a history nerd. He really did take his bachelor party to Springfield, Illinois, to look at Abe Lincoln, to walk the Lincoln Trail or see some of the Lincoln sites. So, it's sometimes it's hard to believe that he's the governor. Like just having had a friendship with him before he became governor, it's still even 6 or 7 years in. Sometimes I'm just like, wow, Eric Holcomb's the governor.
His office was right next to mine at State Party when he was running Daniels' campaign in 2008.
Yeah.
It's kind of like every once in a while when I see Greg Ballard, even 10 or 12 years later, I'm still like, how did you win? He goes, Robert, it's been 15 years. I'm like, I still can't understand it, but I get it.
And I think a lot of Hoosiers get that too. And that's why he connects so well as a candidate. That's why he connects so well with voters, because he connected so well with people, before he became a candidate. And then, that's why he got the most votes ever for a gubernatorial candidate.
You said that, really didn't have many issues or, didn't have many worries. What's the biggest PR nightmare you've ever dealt with?
Well, when I was...
Caused by you or your client, or just you had to, we got to comment on this somehow?
I will say it wasn't caused by me. I think it was caused by several people. But when I was director of communications for the Indiana Office of Tourism, that I was there while the blow up over RFRA happened. And one of the reasons I wanted to...
So I caused that.
That was you?
I was comms director for Mike Pence for Indiana.
Well, thank you for that.
We could.
Yeah, I weighed 180 pounds before that, and then I started stress eating. And look at me now. But that was one of the, I'd always been interested in the tourism industry, and I kind of wanted to remove myself from politics for a few years. And I thought, hey, the state tourism office, that's a good opportunity. Politics will never touch it. And then Robert Vane comes along with his RFRA. No, I mean, it was a tough, for me, it was a tough week. I can only imagine how much tougher it was for moving up. But it was like, if you were from outside Indiana and you were mad at the state for something, how do you voice that? You email the state tourism office comms director that you are, this, your state's full of this, and this. I'm never, I'll drive all the way around Indiana. I'm not even going to fill up my gas tank and things like that. So,
I joke still that I was one of the few people, I was the only person, I don't want to overstate it, who was against RFRA and thought it was a bad idea. Mm-hmm. And I'm also the only person who lost his job because of RFRA. You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmong Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and NFP, a national insurance broker with strong local content. Our guest is Jake Oakman, Executive Director, White River State Park Development Commission. I mentioned this a few minutes ago. I'm going to ask you, is there a particular Hoosier leader and or legend you admire most, not named Jim Morris?
As an IU grad, I would say Herman Wells was somebody that, especially when I first moved to the state to go to IU, that I learned a lot about and admired how he sort of made Indiana University a worldwide university. Mitch Daniels, Eric Holcomb, I mean, those two men that I've had the opportunity to work directly with and get to know on a personal level. Governor Holcomb more so than Governor Daniels, but I mean, those are the ones that sort of immediately spring to mind. I think Herman Wells would be kind of the one sort of that, obviously, he was still living when I started at IU. I think he might have passed the year before I got there, or the year I got there, but you just go into IU, you just learn a lot about him. And I had the chance to get to know some administration people who worked directly for him. And so I just learned a lot about his leadership and what he meant to the university. And if you think about what the university means to the state, that probably doesn't happen without Herman Wells.
And you think about a lot of places, institutions where there's a clear watershed leader. Mm-hmm. There's Indianapolis before Dick Lugar, afterward. There's Marian University before Dan Elsner, mm-hmm. afterward. The list goes on and on, right? Mitch Daniels, you could say the same for the state, how he turned it around. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Herman Wells seems to very much fit that category.
Absolutely.
There's Indiana University, and then there's the post-Wells.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right.
Let's talk about your current job, Executive Director of the White River State Park Development Commission. We know you for the wonderful concerts held at the TCU Amphitheater. Mm-hmm. What made you want to take this position, and what's your self-job review after a year or two?
I think I have better grades here than I did at IU, so I don't think I need to run for anything to prove myself. I just love the park. I think it is having that tourism background with the state office and with working for the Indianapolis Indians before then. I just realized how important tourism is to our economy and to our city. I think the park is really, if you look at the collection of the assets we have here between the amphitheater, the zoo, Victory Field, the museums, the NCAA, and then just all the outdoor spaces. I mean, it really is sort of the crown jewel as an attraction in central Indiana. There aren't many cities that could boast an urban state park like we have. And just that mix of, we're in a museum right now doing this interview, but then I'm not going to, but you can go on a 2-mile, 3-mile, 8-mile run outside. It's just really unique. And I think one of the things that we need to do as a staff at the park is really tell that story of what White River State Park is as a whole. It isn't just the concerts, which is great. It isn't just the zoo, but it's the visionaries like Dick Lugar and Jim Morris and, so many others.
Ted Bohm, mm-hmm. Very bipartisan.
Carroll, Welliver, those men. It's a tremendous legacy that they've left behind, and to have the opportunity to lead it into this next iteration of what we're going to become is really exciting.
Cities are known for being plagiarists, copycatters. What do you learn from other cities? If you go to a Nashville or San Antonio or someplace, you're like, man, they've got something that we need to have here, because we know that other cities mm-hmm. come here, other states come here. And the Sports Corp is a great example how that's, gone viral, for lack of a better term, across the country. What do you learn from other cities, other tourism, and what do you think they learn from us?
I think you learn so much by just being a tourist, by traveling. You learn what works and what doesn't work. One of the conversations I have a lot since I've been in this job is, our canal is this great asset, but why can't we make it like the San Antonio Riverwalk? I think I've heard that at least twice a week since I've been in this job.
Well, Sherry Seiwert used to be at downtown India at the IEDC now. She was heavily involved with this in the Goldsmith administration. We talked about that when she came on the podcast, that, they always have ideas to improve it, or, this is what someplace does.
And I think one thing, we have that Hoosier humility and don't really like to pat ourselves on the back a lot, but I think there's a lot that has happened in this city and in the state that others have learned from. And just like you'd mentioned, the Sports Corps, I think if you look at Victory Field was built in 1996 and is still the sort of gold standard of what minor league ballparks are. And I think just about any minor league ballpark that was built after that, they come here and check that out. And I think that's something that we can really be proud of.
We were talking about Hoosier leaders and legends you admire. So I'll throw a name at you, a family name, the Schumachers.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, they were sports in Indianapolis before Indianapolis was a sports town. I mean, if you look at what Max did with the Indians out at Busch Stadium and then realizing that their future was going to be as a key cornerstone of the downtown. And that's another family that it's, you know, they're synonymous with minor league baseball around the nation. And I know Bruce and Mark pretty well from having worked there for a few seasons. They're not boastful. They're not, you know, looking to get attention. But
very unassuming.
Yeah. But they're another one of those families that Indianapolis should be proud that we have them. And then just the impact that they've had on the city, and then the industry of minor league baseball throughout the country is pretty amazing. You
mentioned the particular, I guess, complex, for lack of a better term, or enclave where we are, where there's the museum, and then there's baseball, and there's the IMAX, and there's the park and the zoo. Is this unique among big cities to have all of this sort of right here in a relatively compact area?
I think it's unique to have it all under the umbrella of one government organization, and how we interact with the different attractions. Each one is a little bit different, but it's all part of the White River State Park campus. I think there's other cities that have looked to this and have sort of said we need to, group all these cultural attractions together or something like that. But I can't think of any that has like a government agency dedicated to like promoting and preserving and growing these types of cultural amenities.
How important are, if Mayor Ballard is listening to this podcast, because he loves to drive. Mm-hmm. He's driven from South Carolina to California like 4 times in the last year. He loves it.
Well, he's probably going to get there quicker than if he flew Southwest. So,
well, that's certainly true. I just can't imagine a Marine like him could get from A to B without someone from the Army saying, turn here, turn here. He loves bicycles, trails, bicycling. How much does the fact that the cultural trail is right here, how much does that make a difference? And you can actually get on the trail, the towpath, and go all the way up to Butler. Like you're situated, and it may be, cart or horse, but clearly you are situated in a magnificent part of downtown that draws people in a way that, because you're kind of out of the mile square a little bit, that people are like, well, we don't care. We'll walk the extra 4 or 5 blocks just to go over there.
I think that's really important. I like to sometimes say that White River State Park is Indianapolis's backyard, especially if you live down here. You may live in an apartment and you don't have access to green space. And when I was growing up, the backyard is where you went to play. It's where you went to just kind of burn off some energy and things like that. And you're right. I mean, we have the largest Pacers bike share hub is in the park. The cultural trail comes through the park. We do have those attractions, but we also have miles and miles of trails and green space that you can just sort of get out, ride your bike, go for a run, and things like that. And again, like having that sort of amenity, even though it's a 250-acre amenity, but having that kind of amenity in a city, I mean, it's a huge driver for quality of life, which leads to positive impacts on economic development and things of that nature.
Do you get to show folks around? Let's say executive from company X is thinking about relocating here. Does the IEDC or, the mayor's office, the governor's office say, Jake will walk you around and show you on there's not many things more welcoming than a beautiful fall day in Indianapolis. 70 degrees, people are all out.
Absolutely.
Is that part of your?
Every once in a while. And I mean, the park is so well known that some of those folks will just do the tour themselves, which is probably a better sales pitch than having me do it. But yeah, I mean, I know that our park and the collection of attractions we have within the park is a huge sales piece for economic development, for conventions. When Visit Indy is trying to bring 50,000, 100,000 people conventions into the city, White River State Park plays a part in attracting those. So it's it is It's a great place to go to a movie, state's largest movie screen. It's a great place to see a concert, but it also has this like daily impact on the quality of life in the city that I think really needs to be appreciated.
In a sense, it's always activated.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we're closed overnight, but that's neither here nor there. But I mean, you don't need to. You can come and enjoy the park for free. You don't necessarily need to go buy a movie ticket to be in White River State Park. And I think that's one of the things from a messaging standpoint that people don't fully understand. That if you go to an Indians game, you're in White River State Park. If you go to see ZZ Top at the TCU Amphitheater, you're in White River State Park. If you go to the Idle Drawer, you're in White River State Park.
So leads me to the logical next question. What's next?
Well, I will say before that, I don't know if you ever think that your cell phone is listening to you, but I just got a notification from Southwest Airlines. I have no trips booked. I haven't looked at anything, but one just popped up. You
slandered them, and they have.
And now they're like, hey, we have some big sales.
I thought maybe it was Pete Seat saying, knock it off, Oakman.
I'll get that text later. What's next for the park? As most of your listeners are probably aware, Elanco is building their global headquarters where the GM stamping plant used to be. They're taking a piece of that. I mean, that's a huge footprint of land, and they're taking a piece of it and building their global headquarters. The park will get some land that's basically going to be kind of the front lawn of the Elanco headquarters and then to the river. So that whole it'll be about 12 to 15 acres total, will be an extension of White River State Park. So we're in the process of kind of deciding how we're going to design that park extension, what sort of attraction, if any, that we'll put down there. And it's going to be a pretty exciting next few years for the park. And just for that whole section of downtown. I mean, there aren't many cities that have an undeveloped, I don't know the acreage of the GM site, but I think you'd be hard-pressed to find many cities that have an undeveloped piece of land that close to downtown, that large.
And the city of Indianapolis has been aggressive in its messaging or in its plans to do something with White River. Like, now's the time to finally get that moving.
Yeah, and I think there's been literally billions of dollars invested into cleaning up the river, not just the part that comes through downtown, but all the way up in Hamilton County, down through Morgan County. And there's a desire, again, our governor, Eric Holcomb, really wants to see some recreation on the river. I know that that's part of Mayor Hogsett's plan, too, for the river. So between the park extension adjacent to Elanco and then just the ability now to really promote some sort of activities on the water, again, it's going to be a really exciting. I like to joke and say that we're called White River State Park, but we're not a traditional state park, and you can't really do anything on the White River. At least one of those two things will change.
Let's talk concerts. That clearly has put State Park, White River State Park, in a different spot than it was 10, 15 years ago. I used to come down here, I think it was Starlight Musicals or something, in the tennis courts. They used to have concerts on the IUPUI tennis courts.
Oh, wow.
In the 70s and 80s. I think maybe Starlight, was that there? Or maybe that was Butler or Close Hall. I can't remember. Anyway, that was the concert spot down here, unless you want to be like my brothers and sisters who saw Led Zeppelin for $9.
Oh, wow.
Back in 76, 77.
Can you imagine paying $9 to see Led Zeppelin? I remember when they did that brief reunion, it's probably been 12 years ago now. They had that big concert in London, and there was talk that the three of them and then Bonham's son were going to do a tour. And I was just like, I would pay an unfortunate amount of money to see that show if it was anywhere within like a 300-mile radius of where I live.
Oh, well, I'd pay $5,000 for a ticket.
Well, you're a lot more successful than I am. Your net worth is a lot higher than mine.
But I'm here interviewing you.
Well, yeah, but we're going to sponsor the podcast, I think, right?
Do you have a favorite concert? I saw ZZ Top here last summer.
Like a favorite concert I've seen here, or just in general?
Just that you've seen here.
The interesting, yes. I mean, there's been so many that
because you get everybody here.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
and
not
that's the
like
thing.
just a particular group of musicians or genre of music.
That's what's so cool about this job is like, there are acts that I got to see that I wouldn't have otherwise. Like, one that comes to mind is Lyle Lovett. That was a really great show. I would have never gone and seen Lyle Lovett before, but he put on a great show. ZZ Top. I'm a classic rock guy. And ZZ Top is legendary. Robert Plant, talking about Led Zeppelin, he came through with Alison Krauss, and he and I actually made eye contact backstage. So that was pretty cool.
Do you make it a point to introduce yourself to these folks?
I don't. I think I could, but I just don't want to. I don't want to. They're here to perform, and they, every artist probably has their own pre-show ritual, and I don't want to just be like, hey, I'm. All this.
Have you found some that are just artists that are just nicer than others? Like they'll just hang out and have some small talk?
If you're kind of the cool thing about Robert Plant is we have this building called the Pump House. And during the concert season, it's where the catering sets up for all the stagehands that are in during the day and setting up the show. And what was really cool, so I went there to get a free dinner because obviously, and I'm sitting there eating supper, and a lot of the stagehands are eating dinner, and Robert Plant comes in. And this is like next to Roger Daltrey from The Who, he's probably my favorite classic rock singer.
It's exactly the same thing my sister says.
Well, she's right.
And she's almost 65, so you're down with the right people.
That's right. And Robert Plant he's wearing like board shorts and a t-shirt, and he has his little mug of tea. And this is like one of the biggest legends in rock history who could just stay in his trailer or go out, but he just like kind of looks around and sits down with the stage crew, and they ended up just talking about soccer for like 20 or 30 minutes. And then he just gets up and says, all right, let's have a good show tonight. And then goes and does his thing. And I just thought that was really cool that, he just doesn't hang out in his trailer or go out on the stage, do a show, and then back to the trailer and out.
So most you've ever paid for a concert ticket anywhere?
I paid, I think when What's Left of The Who toured with Quadrophenia, I think it was back in 2013, They were at the Yum Center in Louisville, and I sat pretty close, and I paid some money for it. I think it was like $300 a ticket or something like that.
Who do you want to come play at the TCU amphitheater?
I joke with our Live Nation partners and say you need to get Pete and Roger here from The Who. Let's just blow it out.
They should. Yes, agreed. I only saw The Who because I accompanied Mayor Ballard to the Super Bowl where the Colts lost to the Saints.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they were the halftime act.
Yeah, they got mixed reviews for that halftime show, but they're still kicking. They were at Ruoff. That was actually the last concert I saw before the pandemic, was when they came through and played up at Ruoff with some musicians from the Indianapolis Symphony. That was a pretty cool show.
You mentioned the COVID pandemic. What was your sense that was going to happen, once we all thought that inevitably I'm not going to say hysteria because that seems pejorative, but the restrictions, were people dying to come back to the park? I couldn't wait to, I rode my bike through it no matter what, but could you just like, this isn't going to kill us. This will make people want to be here even more.
Yeah, I wasn't here when I wasn't in this position when the pandemic hit. I know obviously it was challenging for the previous executive director and the team, as it was for everyone. But again, the nice thing about the park is it's a park. So yes, the IMAX was closed, or yes, we couldn't have a concert season, but we still had the trails, we still had the outdoor spaces, we still had the opportunities to social distance. But yeah, I think what you saw, especially 2022, this last concert season was really the first full post-pandemic TCU amphitheater concert season. And we did like 52 shows, which is more than double what we would have done when it was just the lawn and before the amphitheater was built. And that was everyone who knows 2 chords or more on the guitar was ready to get out and tour. Everyone had a pent-up desire to go see live music. I think, and if you talk to the leaders of the individual attractions, I think all of them will tell you that 2022 was close to, if not, better than 2019 as far as visitors and dollars and things like that. So, yeah, I think people were ready to get back to normal. And we didn't have any issues with. We were safe and followed the protocols, but once we got our concert season going, we didn't really have any issues with COVID or anything like that.
You are listening to the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest is Jake Oakman, Executive Director, White River State Park Development Commission. Jake is an avid fan of the Boston Red Sox.
Mm-hmm. That's accurate.
What's your favorite Red Sox memory besides winning a World Series?
I was about to say when Edgar Renteria hit a comebacker to Keith Foulke in 2004 and he underhanded it to Doug Mankiewicz and ended the 86-year Curse of the Bambino.
Was that the year, because I don't follow baseball like I used to, was that the year they won it where they were down 3-0 to the Yankees and came back? Mm-hmm. I was going to say that has to be.
Dave Roberts stealing the base in the bottom of the ninth of Game 4 after Kevin Millar got the walk against Rivera. I mean, but even then it was like, I remember my first reaction to that game was, okay, at least the Yankees aren't going to sweep them. And you have to remember the year before that, they lost in 7 games to the Yankees with the extra inning walk-off home run. So I was just thrilled that, okay, they won a game. They won that one in extra innings. I was like, okay, they're not going to get swept. And then like the next game was another extra inning. I think that's the one Ortiz either hit a walk-off home run or a walk-off double or something like that. But then that's when, and then Game 6, Curt Schilling on the bloody ankle. I mean, just that whole like 10-day period from Game 4 of the ALCS to Game 4 of the World Series was probably the closest I'll get to heaven on earth as long as I'm living.
Curt Schilling belong in the Baseball Hall of Fame?
Without question.
He's being punished because...
I'm not going to get into how the voters are deciding, but if you look at his body of work as a baseball player on the field, especially as a big game pitcher, I mean, guys like him, if Jack Morris is in the Hall of Fame, I think you have to make it, which he deserves. I think you have to make an argument that Schilling, he's not doing himself any favors as a candidate. But
speaking of needing your PR,
right? Yeah, Curt, put the phone down. But I think his body of work as a baseball player puts him in the Hall of Fame.
Jake is also a longtime and fervent supporter of Indiana University basketball and other sports. Give me your all-time IU basketball starting 5.
In my lifetime or okay. Oh man, that's a tough one.
You were president of the student body. You tell me.
That's true. I mean, I'll just take that starting 5 from 02, but no, I mean, I think you got to put, man, I start with Kent Benson. I got to know him a little. I haven't talked to him in a long time, but I got to know him a little bit when I was a student. And just that team.
Well, he was running for Secretary of State.
That was actually probably my first like real Indiana political involvement was his Secretary of State campaign. A guy named Jim Banks connected me with Kent Benson, and I got involved in that race. But man, that's a tough question. There's just names coming into my mind. I'm trying to like put together how you would put a starting 5 between like Benson, May, Buckner, Thomas, Cheney, Alford, and then like the winner of a new car, Jared Jeffries. I don't know if you saw that.
Price is Right, which he'll never fit into. It was so
right.
funny.
No, that was the other thing. It was like a Kia Sorrento or something.
Let me ask you this question. This is what my friend Mark Apple and the wonderful Bill Benner and I talk about when we have lunch, speaking of IU grads. Mm-hmm. I'll take the 76 national championship team, and you can have the field of every other IU team.
I think you win. I think you could take that 76 championship team and take the field of any other championship. I think that's the greatest college basketball team that's ever been assembled. And, I mean, they were one injury away the previous year of basically going 2 years undefeated when it was a lot more competitive than when UCLA was doing it, 10 or 15 years prior.
A little bit more honest.
Well, yeah. Mm-hmm.
If you ask Coach Knight, I thought one of Knight's most underrated accomplishments is the fact that he won 36 in a row in the Big Ten. Mm-hmm. Went undefeated 36-0 in 2 years in the Big Ten. That is shockingly impressive.
Yeah. I mean, he was a good coach. It's sad the way it ended. But I am glad that they've had this sort of, I thought like, I wouldn't care anymore because it had been 20 years or so since he got fired, and he made it clear that he wasn't interested in a reconciliation. But whatever it was 2 or 3 years ago when he came to the Purdue game, I was a lot more emotional than I thought I would be. I mean, I didn't cry like I did when the Red Sox first won the World Series, but it was actually really cool to see that there could be some sort of reconciliation and some closure. And now that he's been, coming to practices and stuff, I do think that's a nice final chapter to his time at IU.
Another reason why we love Jake so much is he is a huge history buff.
Are you saying that because of my weight?
Which part?
The huge?
I was calling you buff.
Oh, dang it. I needed to, yeah, okay. I got to look on the bright side.
It's all about the spin, bruh.
I still learn from you every day. I learn from you.
Which, I know you're a big World War II history fan. What is it about that conflict that garners your attention more than others?
I think it's recency more than anything else. I mean, both of my grandpas, as most people my age, both of my grandpas served in World War II. My dad's dad was actually wounded at Mount Cassino in Italy. My mom's dad,
at the monastery?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. He was shot in the leg by a sniper. And my mom's dad served in England during the war. So then like that whole generation, I mean, they were, I was really close to my grandparents growing up, especially my mom's parents, and just sort of having that direct connection to that generation and that war meant a lot. And then you get into some of it's just got some pretty colorful characters that you can study on an individual basis. Some of the individual generals, the stakes were enormous when you think about what was going on in both theaters. And then again, that's sort of like the GI was just, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, and they put aside whatever they were doing or whatever their ambitions were, went overseas to save the world, and that is not an exaggeration, and then just kind of came home and went on with life. And I think that, just that whole generation, they're pretty amazing for having done that.
Do you have a favorite World War II book?
I do. I mean, the Rick Atkinson wrote a trilogy.
Army at Dawn.
Yeah, it was Army at Dawn, Guns at Last Light, and Day of Battle, I think, Day of Battle's the second one. I would say if you really want to know what the United States did in the European theater, that's you should read those 3 books. It's a commitment. I mean, he is very detailed in his research. There's several. I've really gotten into sort of the espionage stories. Like there's a book called Operation Mincemeat. There's an author, Ben McIntyre, who sort of writes these. They're true. But these books about like the subterfuge and the spy stories of World War II, and Operation Mincemeat, Operation Double Cross, which was about all the D-Day things. Those 2 come to mind. But just on the whole, as far as Europe goes, the Atkinson trilogy is it's pretty good.
We have had a half dozen, I think, Chris, World War II authors on the podcast who've written terrific books about them. And actually, I just finished today a book called Hitler's American Gambit. No, Gamble. Gamble. And it's about the 4 days in between the attack on Pearl Harbor and then the declaration of war on the 11th by Germany against the United States. And that author, Brendan Sims, is coming on the podcast.
Oh, good.
There is so much to learn about that. Do you have another era before we get to the final 5 questions? Do you have another era that's kind of
I like that revolutionary era and that sort of first generation, kind of from the revolution to maybe the Madison presidency, because I think Quincy Adams was after him, right?
Correct.
So, yeah, I mean, he's literally a second generation. So those 2, and like Joseph J. Ellis is one of my favorite authors from that era. So those are the 2 that I read a lot about.
Do you remember going to see Saving Private Ryan in the theaters?
I do.
It's the only there's only been 2 movies at the end of which nobody got up. Saving Private Ryan and Schindler's List. Everyone just kind of sat there for a while trying to absorb. What did you think of that movie? Did either your grandfathers see it?
My dad's dad died before that movie came out. My mom's dad wasn't a big moviegoer. He did he saw Patton in the theaters, and then he didn't see another movie in the theaters until I think Schindler's List. But I'll say 2 things about that. One, that movie, for as visceral as it is and for as accurate as it is, and when that movie came out, you would hear stories about veterans having to get up and leave, especially during the D-Day scene, because it was too real. But having been with Governor Holcomb to Omaha Beach, and I have a little jar of sand on my mantle from Omaha Beach, that still almost doesn't do justice to like being on the beach and looking up and seeing, even 75 years later, you can still see the defensive bunkers and everything that those men had to go into. And I remember we went to Omaha Beach. We saw that, and then I watched Saving Private Ryan on my iPad on the drive back to our hotel, and just being there and being on the beach and realizing what those guys had to do. I mean, there was no option. Failure was not an option. And I know Eisenhower wrote that letter, that famous letter that never got sent, where he takes all the blame for the failure. But it's amazing to me that they were able to accomplish what they accomplished on that day.
Did you go to the cemetery?
Mm-hmm.
I've had some friends say they were going to the cemetery. I went probably 25, 26 years ago, and I just say, be prepared to be overwhelmed. And they're like, yeah, I can't wait to go. And I'm like,
it's not, yeah.
I'm like, there's Arlington National is obviously a very, powerful place. I mean, even walking around Crowne Hill and seeing some of the names, but I say, just understand that it's going to hit you.
Yep. And
you're going to be like everybody else who it hits when they walk in there. And I just read an article. There's a team of French, most of them are elderly or like French senior citizens. But when you're there, do you notice that the birth and the date, and their names and all that stuff they're all like gold. There's a group of Frenchmen, and all they do this as their work. They take the actual sand from Omaha. Go ahead, finish, Jake. You know what I'm talking about.
And then they rub it into the name and the dates on the or the crosses or the stars of David to make them pop out. It's an incredibly moving, like, again, is accurate from a violent standpoint as Saving Private Ryan is. Being there being at Omaha Beach and at the American Cemetery on like the calmest day, when in the off season of tour, we were there in September. That's when it really hits you. And what was fascinating to me is we also on that same trip happened to drive through Luxembourg to get to our next meeting, and that's where George Patton was buried. I was going to say, did you go to his? We did, and so Teddy Roosevelt Jr. is the highest ranking. The Medal of Honor. He received the Medal of Honor, and he's the highest ranking. I believe he's the highest ranking officer buried at Normandy, and he's just sort of one of many. You go to, as far as like being in a row, he's not like set aside, here's a general or anything like that.
Had a heart attack, I think. On the beach.
I think it was like 3 or 4 weeks later, but yeah.
Omar Bradley said, they asked him what was the greatest act of heroism he'd ever seen, and he said Ted Roosevelt Jr. on Omaha Beach.
Yeah, walking with a cane, by the way, storming the beach. You go to Luxembourg and at Patton, at the American Cemetery in Luxembourg, which is where a lot of the Battle of the Bulge soldiers are buried. And I think there's an Indiana recipient of the Medal of Honor who's buried at that cemetery. But it's like Patton is front and center of his troops. And then they're all like fanned out, like they're at attention in front of the general. And even still in the afterlife, he is the general.
Well, we have a podcast coming up that you'll enjoy. It's with, we recorded it about a month ago, I think. It's with Martin Dugard, who is the co-author of Bill O'Reilly with all those books. But he wrote a book about the race to Berlin, and Patton plays a huge part of that. It's a terrific book, but plays a big role.
That's on my list to get to.
The only thing that I can compare Normandy to, and it's not a comparison per se, but just where you're there and you start looking around and you're like, what in the hell? How could they possibly have done? Is Seminary Ridge at Gettysburg.
Oh, yeah.
Where you stand there and you look 2 miles and you're like, In 85-degree weather, wearing wool uniforms, you're going to run across this entire...
Mm-hmm.
We have reached the point in the Leaders and Legends podcast where we ask the same 5 questions of all of our guests. Jake Oakman, are you ready?
I was born ready.
What was your first job?
I was a paper boy for the Springfield News-Sun in Springfield, Ohio. I've been working since I was 8 years old. These kids, they don't know what that's like.
So, you should run for something on that platform.
Yeah. What was the son of a postman? No, it's someone else.
What was your first concert that you paid for, went to?
It was we didn't get a lot of concerts through Springfield. I mean, there was a lot of like community summer concerts and stuff like that. The first one I probably paid to was actually, I think it was the Black Crowes. They played in Louisville. I was either senior at IU. I mean, it was late for like a first concert, but that was a hell of a show. That's a good rock and roll band. I'm glad to see that the brothers have buried the hatchet and
getting along.
Yeah, or somebody probably said like, "Here's a balance sheet of what you guys would get if you could fly separately, you could drive. You don't have to talk to each other, but
like the Davies brothers from the Kinks."
Yeah,
If you could suggest any book for someone to read, which book would you recommend?
Actually, I'd probably if you ask me this question in an hour, you'll get a different answer. If you ask me tomorrow, you'll get a different answer. But talking about the Revolutionary era and Joseph J. Ellis, his book, Founding Brothers, that he got the Pulitzer Prize for, I think is an excellent book. And it's basically each chapter is sort of its own story about a significant event during the founding of the country. And I think that should be required reading in every high school. We
have tried to get him on the podcast.
Really?
Yeah, and he's a little bit older, but we're going to keep trying. I've done several of these Revolutionary era podcasts, and I'd love to have him on. His books are just so readable.
Mm-hmm. He's the best. I think when it comes to that era, he's the best. I mean, I can't think of anyone as consistent as he's been. But that Founding Brothers is tremendous. And what's interesting is, like, especially for as big as Hamilton got, the Broadway show, there's the room where it happens, that story is in Founding Brothers about that deal and stuff like that. So that's just the one that comes to mind today. Like I said, when you're buying me a drink in a couple hours, I'll probably have a different answer.
All right. You ready for this one? Since I know you listen to the podcast, you're very kind. You know which one's coming. If you could witness any event in history, be there in person as it happens, which event would you choose?
I mean, I would have liked to have been in the stands in 2004 when the Red Sox won. But I think the real answer would be if I could just have been a fly at the wall at the Second Continental Congress when they ratified passed the Declaration of Independence, argued about it, passed it. I mean, that would have been a hell of a thing.
Last question. If you could have dinner with anyone living today, 2 hours off the record, talk about anything you want, whom would you choose? Living today.
Either Pete Townsend or Terry Francona.
You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmong Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and NFP, a national insurance broker with strong local content. As always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. MacAllister. Our guest has been Jake Oakman, and if you have listened to this podcast in full for the last hour, you will understand exactly why Jake has been so successful. He is kind, he's generous, he's funny,
good looking,
he's smart, he's good looking, tall,
single for now,
full head of hair.
Yeah, gorgeous hair,
great hair.
Yeah,
thank you, Jake.
If you want to run your hands through it, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.
This podcast was produced and edited by Chris Spangle and Leaders and Legends, LLC. If you're interested in starting a podcast or taking yours to the next level, please contact us at leadersandlegends.net.